everyone, welcome back. It's Christina, the manager at the Pacific Beach Library. I'm happy to join you again for another day of our read aloud together of The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. Today we have 2 chapters. I had originally intended on doing one mid-length chapter, and then I was like, no, it's a really long book. We're powering through it. We're going to do 2 chapters today, and so let's get right to it. Today's tea is a tea bag. I didn't do the loose leaf today. And so it's a black tea with a peach flavor. So let me get that poured out. A friend of mine had gotten a set of, I think it was like 6 different flavors of tea, and she's not a big tea drinker, so she gave it to me a while back, and I finally opened it up. So yeah, those are really good. It's just kind of, most of them are black teas. I think there was like 5 black teas and 1 green tea, and then they all have like a fruity flavor added into it. So this is the black tea with a bit of peach. Very nice. Okay, so yesterday's chapter, we read chapter 45 of the Count of Monte Cristo, and that one was called The Rain of Blood. Dun, dun, dun. Nice and gruesome, but not as bad as that execution scene during the carnival. I'm not going to get over that one for a while, I think. Okay, but The Rain of Blood in chapter 45, what that was about was continuing the story of Bertuccio, who was at that point recounting to the Count of Monte Cristo what had happened years before, when he had visited his associate Caderousse, who was, he was somebody he knew from his smuggling days, and he had gone because, he had gone to visit Caderousse because the ship upon which he'd been working as a smuggler, that the authorities had come by and raided the ship, and so he was hiding at Caderousse's. But before he could speak to Caderousse, he saw that he had a visitor, the jeweler, and so he was sort of being quiet and waiting until Caderousse was alone so he could, say, I'm here. What ended up happening, though, was that the jeweler was there, summoned by Caderousse, because he had just that day received an incredibly valuable diamond from the Abbé Busoni, which is another alias of Edmond Dantes, whom Bertuccio knows as the Count of Monte Cristo. And so he overhears the story about between Caderousse and his wife and the jeweler talking about how Caderousse had acquired this gem. And the jeweler was going to leave after having paid Caderousse and his wife, but instead he was caught in the storm, and so he comes back to stay there. And Caderousse's wife convinces her husband that they ought to kill the jeweler so they can keep both the diamond and the money that he's paid them for the diamond. So Bertuccio doesn't quite piece this together, that that's what's going to happen. And so he's there hiding kind of underneath their house, sort of, and he's hiding just outside their inn, but just where he can hear it, but he's not in there. And he overhears them talking, and the clues are there for us because we know what's going to happen. And eventually he overhears, the jeweler saying, I'm going to go up to bed, and the jeweler goes up, and he falls asleep too. Everything's quiet, there's a storm outside, it's very relaxing, and then he wakes up to hear a shot. And what he eventually discovers is that it looked like the Caderousse and his wife had come in to accost the jeweler. The jeweler slept with his 2 guns. He shot La Carcante, the wife of Caderousse. She ends up dying on the floor there. Caderousse manages to stab the jeweler and kills him. Not immediately. He's still dying by the time Bertuccio comes up there. But Caderousse leaves the inn. Bertuccio doesn't know at this point what's going on. Who knows? And so he goes up there to investigate. He sees Caderousse's wife dead on the floor. He sees the jeweler dying, and he doesn't know. He's just confused by what's gone on, and he manages to get blood on him too, because when he's trying to help the jeweler to revive him, he's unable to do so. And then also when he'd been hiding down in his little area that he was hiding in, he had felt something dripping onto him, and he thought maybe it was water or something from the rain. No, of course it was the blood of Caderousse's wife. And so when he leaves the room where Caderousse's wife and the jeweler have died, and he's coming down, he is accosted by the gendarme, the policeman of the area, who the policeman who had been investigating the smugglers. They had seen him go in that area, and so they had gotten more authorities, and they'd gone actually to that inn to look for Bertuccio, and instead they found not just a smuggler, but a smuggler covered in blood and 2 dead people upstairs. So of course they presume that he is the murderer. He tells them it was Caderousse. They don't believe him. They arrest him. And then while he's there, he tells them, here's the story of what I overheard, that it was Caderousse and that there was an abbé who gave this incredibly valuable jewel to him. If only can find the Abbé Busoni, he can corroborate what happened, at least to the point of Caderousse receiving that gem. And so the authorities, they go out and they're trying to find this mysterious Abbé Busoni whom nobody's heard of. And then finally, the abbé appears. And the abbé corroborates the story indeed, and he also agrees to hear the confession of Bertuccio. And Bertuccio not only tells him about what had occurred at Caderousse's, but also he tells them a bit about what had happened at the house at Auteuil, that he had committed a sin at some point, that he had killed Monsieur de Villefort, and he felt that this is why this trial had been visited upon him, as, it was his payback, basically, for what he had done, that he had taken a life. And therefore, he had made this confession to the Abbé Busoni, who'd said, you seem like an honest guy, you seem like you could use a break, you shouldn't go back into smuggling. I know a guy named the Count of Monte Cristo. I will recommend that you recommend you to him, but you have to promise you're always going to be honest with him, and you're going to do a good job. And Bertuccio's like, of course, I would love to work for your friend the Count of Monte Cristo. And then the Abbé Busoni writes a letter that the Count of Monte Cristo receives. Again, Abbé Busoni and Count of Monte Cristo, same guy. And so when the Count of Monte Cristo reads the letter written by the Abbé Busoni, he says, yes, I will offer you employment. And so he becomes the employer and employer of Bertuccio. Bertuccio at this point has now unburdened himself, and he's just so grateful to be working for the Count of Monte Cristo. And afterwards, after he's unburdened himself in this way, the Count of Monte Cristo goes back to his house, where he is joined by his other servants, Ali, and then Haydée, Haydee. I looked it up too on how to pronounce it properly in the French way, and I think it was Haydée or Haydée. Oh no, I don't remember right now. But I'm going to say it Haydée, I think, because I know we're not supposed to pronounce the hard H, but I think I'm going with it. So he finds her there also, and she is the Greek. She's often referred to as the mysterious and lovely Greek woman. She is also somebody whom he is referred to as not just his mistress, but as his slave. And so, although now that they're back in France, where slavery is outlawed, she is a free woman again. So we'll learn more about these characters and the repercussions of what the new things that Edmond Dantes / the Count of Monte Cristo learned from Bertuccio in the coming chapters. So we've learned a bit more about what happened with Caderousse, the old associate of Edmond Dantes. Now we're going to learn more about somebody else from his past. Monsieur Danglars is going to be figuring in these next few chapters. So today we're going to read two chapters, chapter 46 and 47. And let's go into our tablet. 46 is called Unlimited Credit. And we already know Danglars is a banker. So let's go in. Chapter 46, Unlimited Credit. About 2 o'clock the following day, a calash, drawn by a pair of magnificent English horses, stopped at the door of Monte Cristo, and a person, dressed in a blue coat with buttons of a similar color, a white waistcoat, over which was displayed a massive gold chain, brown trousers, and a quantity of black hair descending so low over his eyebrows as to leave it doubtful whether it were not artificial, so little did its jetty glossiness assimilate with the deep wrinkles stamped on his features. A person, in a word, who, although evidently past 50, desired to be taken for not more than 40, bent forwards from the carriage door, on the panels of which were emblazoned the armorial bearings of a baron, and directed his groom to inquire at the porter's lodge whether the Count of Monte Cristo resided there, and if he were within. While waiting, the occupant of the carriage surveyed the house, the garden as far as he could distinguish it, and the livery of servants who passed to and fro, with an attention so close as to be somewhat impertinent. His glance was keen, but showed cunning rather than intelligence. His lips were straight, and so thin that as they closed, they were drawn in over the teeth. His cheekbones were broad and projecting, a never-failing proof of audacity and craftiness, while the flatness of his forehead and the enlargement of the back of his skull, which rose much higher than his large and coarsely shaped ears, combined to form a physiognomy anything but prepossessing, save in the eyes of such as consider that the owner of so splendid an equipage must needs be all that was admirable and enviable, more especially when they gazed on the enormous diamond that glittered in his shirt and the red ribbon that depended from his buttonhole. The groom, in obedience to his orders, tapped at the window of the porter's lodge, saying, "Pray, does not the Count of Monte Cristo live here?" "His Excellency does reside here," replied the concierge, "but," added he, glancing an inquiring look at Ali. Ali returned a sign in the negative. "But what?" asked the groom. "His Excellency does not receive visitors today." "Then here is my master's card, the Baron Danglars. You will take it to the Count and say that, although in haste to attend the chamber, my master came out of his way to have the honor of calling upon him." "I never speak to His Excellency," replied the concierge. "The valet de chambre will carry your message." The groom returned to the carriage. "Well?" asked Danglars. The man, somewhat crestfallen by the rebuke he had received, repeated what the concierge had said. "Bless me," murmured Baron Danglars, "this must surely be a prince instead of a count by their styling him Excellency, and only venturing to address him by the medium of his valet de chambre. However, it does not signify. He has a letter of credit on me, so I must see him when he requires his money." Then, throwing himself back in his carriage, Danglars called out to his coachman in a voice that might be heard across the road, "To the Chamber of Deputies." Apprised in time of the visit paid him, Monte Cristo had, from behind the blinds of his pavilion, as minutely observed the Baron, by means of an excellent lorgnette, as Danglars himself had scrutinized the house, garden, and servants. "That fellow has a decidedly bad countenance," said the Count in a tone of disgust, as he shut up his glass into its ivory case. "How comes it that all do not retreat in aversion at sight of that flat, receding, serpent-like forehead, round, vulture-shaped head, and sharp-hooked nose like the beak of a buzzard? Ali!" cried he, striking at the same time on the brazen gong. Ali appeared. "Summon Bertuccio," said the Count. Almost immediately Bertuccio entered the apartment. "Did your Excellency desire to see me?" inquired he. "I did," replied the Count. "You no doubt observed the horses standing a few minutes since at the door?" "Certainly, your Excellency. I noticed them for their remarkable beauty." "Then how comes it," said Monte Cristo with a frown, "that when I desired you to purchase for me the finest pair of horses to be found in Paris, there is another pair, fully as fine as mine, not in my stables?" At the look of displeasure, added to the angry tone in which the Count spoke, Ali turned pale and held down his head. "It is not your fault, my good Ali," said the Count in the Arabic language, and with a gentleness none would have thought him capable of showing, either in voice or face. "It is not your fault. You do not understand the points of English horses." The countenance of poor Ali recovered its serenity. "Permit me to assure your Excellency," said Bertuccio, "that the horses you speak of were not to be sold when I purchased yours." Monte Cristo shrugged his shoulders. "It seems, Sir Steward," said he, "that you have yet to learn that all things are to be sold to such as care to pay the price." "His Excellency is not, perhaps, aware that Monsieur Danglars gave 16,000 francs for his horses?" "Very well. Then offer him double that sum. A banker never loses an opportunity of doubling his capital." "Is your Excellency really in earnest?" inquired the steward. Monte Cristo regarded the person who durst presume to doubt his words with the look of one equally surprised and displeased. "I have a visit to pay this evening," replied he. "I desire that these horses, with completely new harness, may be at the door with my carriage." Bertuccio bowed and was about to retire, but when he reached the door he paused and then said, "At what o'clock does your Excellency wish the carriage and horses to be ready?" "At 5 o'clock," replied the Count. "I beg your Excellency's pardon," interposed the steward in a deprecating manner, "for venturing to observe that it is already 2 o'clock." "I am perfectly aware of that fact," answered Monte Cristo calmly. Then turning towards Ali, he said, Let all the horses in my stables be led before the windows of your young lady, that she may select those she prefers for her carriage. Request her also to oblige me by saying whether it is her pleasure to dine with me. If so, let dinner be served in her apartments. Now leave me, and desire my valet de chambre to come hither." Scarcely had Ali disappeared when the valet entered the chamber. "Monsieur Baptistine," said the Count, "you have been in my service 1 year, the time I generally give myself to judge of the merits or demerits of those about me. You suit me very well." Baptistine bowed low. "It only remains for me to know whether I also suit you?" "Oh, your Excellency!" exclaimed Baptistine eagerly. "Listen, if you please, till I have finished speaking," replied Monte Cristo. "You receive 1,500 francs per annum for your services here, more than many a brave subaltern who continually risks his life for his country obtains. You live in a manner far superior to many clerks who work 10 times harder than you do for their money. Then, though yourself a servant, you have other servants to wait upon you, take care of your clothes, and see that your linen is duly prepared for you. Again, you make a profit upon each article you purchase for my toilette, amounting in the course of a year to a sum equaling your wages." "Nay, indeed, your Excellency." "I am not condemning you for this, Monsieur Baptistine, but let your profits end here. It would be long indeed ere you would find so lucrative a post as that you have now the good fortune to fill. I neither ill-use nor ill-treat my servants by word or action. An error I readily forgive, but willful negligence or forgetfulness never. My commands are ordinarily short, clear, and precise, and I would rather be obliged to repeat my words twice, or even 3 times, than they should be misunderstood. I am rich enough to know whatever I desire to know, and I can promise you I am not wanting in curiosity. If, then, I should learn that you had taken upon yourself to speak of me to anyone, favorably or unfavorably, to comment on my actions or watch my conduct, that very instant you would quit my service. You may now retire. I never caution my servants a second time. Remember that." Baptistine bowed and was proceeding towards the door. "I forgot to mention to you," said the Count, "that I lay yearly aside a certain sum for each servant in my establishment. Those whom I am compelled to dismiss lose, as a matter of course, all participation in this money, while their portion goes to the fund accumulating for those domestics who remain with me, and among whom it will be divided at my death. You have been in my service a year. Your fund has already begun to accumulate. Let it continue to do so." This address, delivered in the presence of Ali, who, not understanding one word of the language in which it was spoken, stood wholly unmoved, produced an effect on Monsieur Baptistine only to be conceived by such as have occasion to study the character and disposition of French domestics. "I assure your Excellency," said he, "that at least it shall be my study to merit your approbation in all things, and I will take Monsieur Ali as my model." "By no means," replied the Count in the most frigid tones. "Ali has many faults mixed with most excellent qualities. He cannot possibly serve you as a pattern for your conduct, not being, as you are, a paid servant, but a mere slave. A dog, who, should he fail in his duty towards me, I should not discharge from my service, but kill." Baptistine opened his eyes with astonishment. "You seem incredulous," said Monte Cristo, who repeated to Ali in the Arabic language what he had just been saying to Baptistine in French. The Nubian smiled assentingly to his master's words, then, kneeling on one knee, respectfully kissed the hand of the Count. This corroboration of the lesson he had just received put the finishing stroke to the wonder and stupefaction of Monsieur Baptistine. The Count then motioned the valet de chambre to retire, and to Ali to follow to his study, where they conversed long and earnestly together. As the hand of the clock pointed to 5, the Count struck thrice upon his gong. When Ali was wanted, one stroke was given, 2 summoned Baptistine, and 3 Bertuccio. The steward entered. "My horses," said Monte Cristo. "They are at the door, harnessed to the carriage as your Excellency desired. Does your Excellency wish me to accompany him?" "No." The coachman, Ali, and Baptistine will go." The Count descended to the door of his mansion and beheld his carriage drawn by the very pair of horses he had so much admired in the morning as the property of Danglars. As he passed them, he said, "They are extremely handsome, certainly, and you have done well to purchase them, although you were somewhat remiss not to have procured them sooner." "Indeed, your Excellency, I had very considerable difficulty in obtaining them, and as it is, they have cost an enormous price." "Does the sum you gave for them make the animals less beautiful?" inquired the Count, shrugging his shoulders. "Nay, if your Excellency is satisfied, it is all that I could wish. Whither does your Excellency desire to be driven?" "To the residence of Baron Danglars, Rue de la Chaussée d'Antin." This conversation had passed as they stood upon the terrace, from which a flight of stone steps led to the carriage drive. As Bertuccio, with a respectful bow, was moving away, the Count called him back. "I have another commission for you, Monsieur Bertuccio," said he. "I am desirous of having an estate by the seaside in Normandy, for instance between Le Havre and Boulogne. You see, I give you a wide range. It will be absolutely necessary that the place you may select have a small harbor, creek, or bay into which my corvette can enter and remain at anchor. She draws only 15 feet. She must be kept in constant readiness to sail immediately. I think proper to give the signal. Make the requisite inquiries for a place of this description, and when you have met with an eligible spot, visit it, and if it possess the advantages desired, purchase it at once in your own name. The corvette must now, I think, be on her way to Fécamp, must she not?" "Certainly, your Excellency. I saw her put to sea the same evening we quitted Marseille." "And the yacht?" "Was ordered to remain at Martigues." "'Tis well. I wish you to write from time to time to the captains in charge of the two vessels, so as to keep them on the alert." "And the steamboat?" "She is at Chalons." "Yes. The same orders for her as for the two sailing vessels." "Very good. When you have purchased the estate I desire, I want constant relays of horses at 10 leagues apart along the northern and southern road." "Your Excellency may depend upon me." The Count made a gesture of satisfaction, descended the terrace steps, and sprang into his carriage, which was whirled along swiftly to the banker's house. Danglars was engaged at that moment presiding over a railroad committee, but the meeting was nearly concluded when the name of his visitor was announced. As the Count's title sounded on his ear, he rose, and addressing his colleagues, who were members of one or other of the chamber, he said, "Gentlemen, pardon me for leaving you so abruptly, but a most ridiculous circumstance has occurred, which is this. Thomson and French, the Roman bankers, have sent to me a certain person calling himself the Count of Monte Cristo, and have given him an unlimited credit with me. I confess, this is the drollest thing I have ever met with in the course of my extensive foreign transactions, and you may readily suppose it has greatly roused my curiosity. I took the trouble this morning to call on the pretended Count. If he were a real Count, he wouldn't be so rich. But would you believe it? He was not receiving. So the master of Monte Cristo gives himself airs befitting a great millionaire or a capricious beauty. I made inquiries and found that the house in the Champs-Élysées is his own property, and certainly it was very decently kept up. But, pursued Danglars with one of his sinister smiles, an order for unlimited credit calls for something like caution on the part of the banker to whom that order is given. I am very anxious to see this man. I suspect a hoax is intended, but the instigators of it little knew whom they had to deal with. They laugh best who laugh last." Having delivered himself of this pompous address, uttered with a degree of energy that left the Baron almost out of breath, he bowed to the assembled party and withdrew to his drawing-room, whose sumptuous furnishings of white and gold had caused a great sensation in the Chaussée d'Antin. It was to this apartment he had desired his guest to be shown, with the purpose of overwhelming him at the sight of so much luxury. He found the Count standing before some copies of Albano and Fattore that had been passed off to the banker as originals, but which, mere copies as they were, seemed to feel their degradation in being brought into juxtaposition with the gaudy colors that covered the ceiling. The Count turned round as he heard the entrance of Danglars into the room. With a slight inclination of the head, Danglars signed to the Count to be seated, pointing significantly to a gilded armchair covered with white satin, embroidered with gold. The Count sat down. "I have the honor, I presume, of addressing Monsieur de Monte Cristo?" The Count bowed. "And I of speaking to Baron Danglars, Chevalier of the Legion of Honor, and member of the Chamber of Deputies?" Monte Cristo repeated all the titles he had read on the Baron's card. Danglars felt the irony and compressed his lips. "You will, I trust, excuse me, monsieur, for not calling you by your title when I first addressed you," he said, "but you are aware that we are living under a popular form of government, and that I am myself a representative of the liberties of the people." "So much so," replied Monte Cristo, "that while you call yourself baron, you are not willing to call anybody else count." "Upon my word, monsieur," said Danglars, with affected carelessness, "I attach no sort of value to such empty distinctions, but the fact is, I was made baron, and also chevalier of the Legion of Honor, in return for services rendered. But you have discarded your titles after the example set you by Messieurs de Montmorency and Lafayette? That was a noble example to follow, monsieur." "Why," replied Danglars, "not entirely so. With the servants, you understand." "I see. To your servants you are 'my lord.' The journalists style you 'monsieur,' while your constituents call you 'citizen.' These are distinctions very suitable under a constitutional government. I understand perfectly." Again Danglars bit his lips. He saw that he was no match for Monte Cristo in an argument of this sort, and he therefore hastened to turn to subjects more congenial. "Permit me to inform you, Count," said he, bowing, "that I have received a letter of advice from Thomson and French, of Rome." "I am glad to hear it, Baron, for I must claim the privilege of addressing you after the manner of your servants. I have acquired the bad habit of calling persons by their titles from living in a country where barons are still barons by right of birth. But as regards the letter of advice, I am charmed to find that it has reached you. That will spare me the troublesome and disagreeable task of coming to you for money myself. You have received a regular letter of advice?" "Yes," said Danglars, "but I confess I didn't quite comprehend its meaning." "Indeed. And for that reason I did myself the honor of calling upon you, in order to beg for an explanation." "Go on, monsieur. Here I am, ready to give you any explanation you desire." "Why," said Danglars, "in the letter, I believe I have it about me." Here he felt in his breast pocket. "Yes, here it is. Well, this letter gives the Count of Monte Cristo unlimited credit on our house." "Well, baron, what is there difficult to understand about that?" "Merely the term unlimited. Nothing else, certainly." "Is not the word known in France? The people who wrote are Anglo-Germans, you know." "Oh, as for the composition of the letter, there is nothing to be said. But as regards the competency of the document, I certainly have doubts." "Is it possible," asked the Count, assuming all air and tone of the utmost simplicity and candor, "is it possible that Thomson and French are not looked upon as safe and solvent bankers? Pray tell me what you think, baron, for I feel uneasy, I can assure you, having some considerable property in their hands." "Thomson and French are perfectly solvent," replied Danglars, with an almost mocking smile. "But the word unlimited in financial affairs is so extremely vague." "Is, in fact, unlimited," said Monte Cristo. "Precisely what I was about to say," cried Danglars. "Now what is vague is doubtful, and it was a wise man who said, 'When in doubt, keep out.'" "Meaning to say," rejoined Monte Cristo, "that however Thomson and French may be inclined to commit acts of imprudence and folly, the Baron Danglars is not disposed to follow their example." "Not at all." "Plainly enough. Messrs. Thomson and French set no bounds to their engagements, while those of Monsieur Danglars have their limits. He is a wise man, according to his own showing." "Monsieur," replied the banker, drawing himself up with a haughty air, the extent of my resources has never yet been questioned." "It seems, then, reserved for me," said Monte Cristo coldly, "to be the first to do so." "By what right, sir?" "By right of the objections you have raised and the explanations you have demanded. which certainly must have some motive. Once more Danglars bit his lips. It was the second time he had been worsted, and this time on his own ground. His forced politeness sat awkwardly upon him, and approached almost to impertinence. Monte Cristo, on the contrary, preserved a graceful suavity of demeanor, aided by a certain degree of simplicity he could assume at pleasure, and thus possessed the advantage. "Well, sir," resumed Danglars, after a brief silence, "I will endeavor to make myself understand by requesting you to inform me for what sum you propose to draw upon me." "Why, truly," replied Monte Cristo, determined not to lose an inch of the ground he had gained, "my reason for desiring an unlimited credit was precisely because I did not know how much money I might need." The banker thought the time had come for him to take the upper hand, so throwing himself back in his armchair, he said, with an arrogant and purse-proud air, "Let me beg of you not to hesitate in naming your wishes. You will then be convinced that the resources of the house of Danglars, however limited, are still equal to meeting the largest demands, and were you even to require 1,000,000—" "I beg your pardon," interposed Monte Cristo. "I said 1,000,000, required Danglars, with the confidence of ignorance. "But could I do with 1,000,000? Retorted the Count. "My dear sir, if a trifle like that could suffice me, I should never have given myself the trouble of opening an account. 1,000,000? Excuse my smiling when you speak of a sum I am in the habit of carrying in my pocket-book or dressing-case." And with these words, Monte Cristo took from his pocket a small case containing his visiting cards, and drew forth 2 orders on the treasury for 500,000 francs each, payable at sight to the bearer. A man like Danglars was wholly inaccessible to any gentler means of correction, or method of correction. The effect of the present revelation was stunning. He trembled, and was on the verge of apoplexy. The pupils of his eyes, as he gazed at Monte Cristo, dilated horribly. "Come, come," said Monte Cristo, "honestly confess that you have not perfect confidence in Thomson and French. I understand, and foreseeing that such might be the case, I took, in spite of my ignorance of affairs, certain precautions. See, here are 2 similar letters to that you have yourself received, one from the house of Arstein and Esquelles of Vienna, to Baron Rothschild, the other drawn by Baring of London upon Monsieur Lafitte. Now, sir, you have but to say the word, and I will spare you all uneasiness by presenting my letter of credit to one or other of these 2 firms." The blow had struck home, and Danglars was entirely vanquished. With a trembling hand he took the 2 letters from the Count, who held them carelessly between finger and thumb, and proceeded to scrutinize the signatures with a minuteness that the Count might have regarded as insulting, had it not suited his present purpose to mislead the banker. "Oh, sir," said Danglars, after he had convinced himself of the authenticity of the documents he held, and, rising as if to salute the power of gold personified in the man before him, "3 letters of unlimited credit! I can be no longer mistrustful, but you must pardon me, my dear Count, for confessing to some degree of astonishment." "Nay," answered Monte Cristo with the most gentlemanly air, "'tis not for such trifling sums as these that your banking house is to be incommoded. Then you can let me have some money, can you not?" "Whatever you say, my dear Count, I am at your orders." "Why," replied Monte Cristo, "since we mutually understand each other, for such I presume is the case," Danglars bowed assentingly, "you are quite sure that not a lurking doubt or suspicion lingers in your mind?" "Oh, my dear Count," exclaimed Danglars, "I never for an instant entertained such a feeling towards you." "No, you merely wish to be convinced, nothing more. But now that we have come to so clear an understanding, and that all distrust and suspicion are laid at rest, we may as well fix a sum as the probable expenditure of the first year. Supposing we say 6 millions to—" "6 millions!" gasped Danglars. "So be it." "Then if I should require more," continued Monte Cristo in a careless manner, "why, of course, I should draw upon you, but my present intention is not to remain in France more than a year, and during that period I scarcely think I shall exceed the sum I mentioned. However, we shall see. Be kind enough, then, to send me 500,000 francs tomorrow. I shall be at home till midday, or if not, I will leave a receipt with my steward." "The money you desire shall be at your house by 10 o'clock tomorrow morning, my dear Count," replied Danglars. "How would you like to have it, in gold, silver, or notes?" "Half in gold, and the other half in notes, in bank notes, if you please," said the Count, rising from his seat. "I must confess to you, Count," said Danglars, "that I have hitherto imagined myself acquainted with the degree of all the great fortunes of Europe, and still wealth such as yours has been wholly unknown to me. May I presume to ask whether you have long possessed it?" "It has been in the family a very long while," returned Monte Cristo. "A sort of treasure, expressly forbidden to be touched for a certain period of years, during which the accumulated interest has doubled the capital. The period appointed by the testator for the disposal of these riches occurred only a short time ago, and they have only been employed by me within the last few years. Your ignorance on the subject, therefore, is easily accounted for. However, you will be better informed as to me and my possessions ere long." And the Count, while pronouncing these latter words, accompanied them with one of those ghastly smiles that used to strike terror into poor Franz d'Épinay. "With your tastes and means of gratifying them," continued Danglars, "you will exhibit a splendor that must effectually put us poor miserable millionaires quite in the shade. If I mistake not, you are an admirer of paintings. At least I judge so from the attention you appeared to be bestowing on mine when I entered the room. If you will permit me, I shall be happy to show you my picture gallery, composed entirely of works by the ancient masters, warranted as such. Not a modern painting among them. I cannot endure the modern school of painting." "You are perfectly right in objecting to them, for this one great fault, that they have not yet had time to become old." "Or will you allow me to show you several fine statues by Thorwaldsen, Bartolini, and Canova, all foreign artists, for as you may perceive, I think but very indifferently of our French sculptors." "You have a right to be unjust to them, monsieur. They are your compatriots." "But all this may come later, when we shall become better known to each other. For the present I will confine myself, if perfectly agreeable to you, to introducing you to the Baroness Danglars. Excuse my impatience, my dear Count, but a client like you is almost like a member of the family." Monte Cristo bowed, in sign that he accepted the proffered honor. Danglars rang and was answered by a servant in a showy livery. "Is the Baroness at home?" inquired Danglars. "Yes, my lord," answered the man. "And alone?" "No, my lord. Madame has visitors." "Have you any objection to meet any persons who may be with Madame, or do you desire to preserve a strict incognito?" "No, indeed," replied Monte Cristo with a smile. "I do not arrogate to myself the right of so doing." "And who is with Madame? Monsieur Debray?" inquired Danglars, with an air of indulgence and good nature that made Monte Cristo smile, acquainted as he was with the secrets of the banker's domestic life. "Yes, my lord," replied the servant. "Monsieur Debray is with Madame." Danglars nodded his head, then, turning to Monte Cristo, said, "Monsieur Lucien Debray is an old friend of ours, and private secretary to the Minister of the Interior. As for my wife, I must tell you, she lowered herself by marrying me, for she belongs to one of the most ancient families in France. Her maiden name was de Servières, and her first husband was Colonel and Marquis of Nargonne. I have not had the pleasure of knowing Madame Danglars, but I have already met Monsieur Lucien Debray." "Ah, indeed," said Danglars. "And where was that?" "At the house of Monsieur de Morcerf." "Ah, you are acquainted with the young Viscount, are you?" "We were together a good deal during the carnival at Rome." "True, true," cried Danglars. "Let me see. Have I not heard talk of some strange adventure with bandits or thieves held in ruins, and his having had a miraculous escape? I forget how, but I know he used to amuse my wife and daughter by telling them about it after his return from Italy." "Her ladyship is waiting to receive you, gentlemen," said the servant, who had gone to inquire the pleasure of his mistress. "With your permission," said Danglars, bowing, "I will precede you, to show you the way." "By all means," replied Monte Cristo. "I follow you." And now chapter 47, The Dappled Greys. The Baron, followed by the Count, traversed a long series of apartments, in which the prevailing characteristics were heavy magnificence and the gaudiness of ostentatious wealth, until he reached the boudoir of Madame Danglars, a small octagonal-shaped room hung with pink satin, covered with white Indian muslin. The chairs were of ancient workmanship and materials. Over the doors were painted sketches of shepherds and shepherdesses, after the style and manner of Boucher, and at each side pretty medallions in crayons, harmonizing well with the furnishings of this charming apartment, the only one throughout the great mansion in which any distinctive taste prevailed. The truth was, it had been entirely overlooked in the plan arranged and followed out by Monsieur Danglars and his architect, who had been selected to aid the Baron in the great work of improvement, solely because he was the most fashionable and celebrated decorator of the day. The decorations of the boudoir had then been left entirely to Madame Danglars and Lucien Debray. Monsieur Danglars, however, while possessing a great admiration for the antique, as it was understood during the time of the Directory, entertained the most sovereign contempt for the simple elegance of his wife's favorite sitting-room, where, by the way, he was never permitted to intrude, unless, indeed, he excused his own appearance by ushering in some more agreeable visitor than himself. And even then he had rather the air and manner of a person who was himself introduced, than that of being the presenter of another, his reception being cordial or frigid in proportion as the person who accompanied him chanced to please or displease the Baroness. Madame Danglars, who, although past the first bloom of youth, was still strikingly handsome, was now seated at the piano, a most elaborate piece of cabinet and inlaid work, while Lucien Debray, standing before a small work-table, was turning over the pages of an album. Lucien had found time, preparatory to the Count's arrival, to relate many particulars respecting him to Madame Danglars. It will be remembered that Monte Cristo had made a lively impression on the minds of all the party assembled at the breakfast given by Albert de Morcerf, and although Debray was not in the habit of yielding to such feelings, he had never been able to shake off the powerful influence excited in his mind by the impressive look and manner of the Count. Consequently, the description given by Lucien to the Baroness bore the highly colored tinge of his own heated imagination. Already excited by the wonderful stories related of the Count by de Morcerf, it is no wonder that Madame Danglars easily listened to and fully credited all the additional circumstances detailed by Debray. This posing at the piano and over the album was only a little ruse adopted by way of precaution. A most gracious welcome and unusual smile were bestowed on Monsieur Danglars. The Count, in return for his gentlemanly bow, received a formal, though graceful courtesy, while Lucien exchanged with the Count a sort of distant recognition, and with Danglars a free and easy nod. "Baroness," said Danglars, "give me leave to present to you the Count of Monte Cristo, who has been most warmly recommended to me by my correspondents at Rome. I need but mention one fact to make all the ladies in Paris court his notice, and that is, that he has come to take up his abode in Paris for a year, during which brief period he proposes to spend 6 millions of money. That means balls, dinners, and lawn parties without end, in all of which I trust the Count will remember us, as he may depend upon it we shall him in our own humble entertainments." In spite of the gross flattery and coarseness of this address, Madame Danglars could not forbear gazing with considerable interest on a man capable of expending 6 millions in 12 months, and who had selected Paris for the scene of his princely extravagance. "And when did you arrive here?" inquired she. "Yesterday morning, madame." "Coming as usual, I presume, from the extreme end of the globe. Pardon me, at least such I have heard is your custom." "Nay, madame, this time I have merely come from Cadiz." "You have selected a most unfavorable moment for your first visit. Paris is a horrible place in summer. Balls, parties, and fêtes are over. The Italian opera is in London, the French opera everywhere except in Paris. As for the Théâtre Français, you know, of course, that it is nowhere. The only amusements left to us are the indifferent races at the Champ de Mars and Satterie. Do you propose entering any horses at either of those races, Count?" "I shall do whatever they do at Paris, madame, if I have the good fortune to find someone who will initiate me into the prevalent ideas of amusement." "Are you fond of horses, Count?" I have passed a considerable part of my life in the East, madame, and you are doubtless aware that the Orientals value only two things, the fine breeding of their horses and the beauty of their women. Nay, Count, said the Baroness, it would have been somewhat more gallant to have placed the ladies first. You see, madame, how rightly I spoke when I said I required a preceptor to guide me in all my sayings and doings here. At this instant the favorite attendant of Madame Danglars entered the boudoir. Approaching her mistress, she spoke some words in an undertone. Madame Danglars turned very pale, then exclaimed, I cannot believe it. The thing is impossible. I assure you, madame, replied the woman, it is as I have said. Turning impatiently towards her husband, Madame Danglars demanded, Is it true? Is what true, madame? Inquired Danglars, visibly agitated. What my maid tells me. But what does she tell you? That when my coachman was about to harness the horses to my carriage, he discovered that they had been removed from the stables without his knowledge. I desire to know what is the meaning of this. Be kind enough, madame, to listen to me, said Danglars. Oh, yes, I will listen, monsieur, for I am most curious to hear what explanations you will give. These two gentlemen shall decide between us, but first I will state the case to them. Gentlemen, continued the Baroness, among the 10 horses in the stables of Baron Danglars are 2 that belong exclusively to me, a pair of the handsomest and most spirited animals or creatures to be found in Paris. But to you, at least, Monsieur Debray, I need not give a further description, because to you my beautiful pair of dappled greys were well known. Well, I had promised Madame de Villefort the loan of my carriage to drive tomorrow to the Bois, but when my coachman goes to fetch the greys from the stables, they are gone. Positively gone. No doubt Monsieur Danglars has sacrificed them to the selfish consideration of gaining some thousands of paltry francs. Oh, what a detestable crew they are, these mercenary speculators. Madame, replied Danglars, the horses were not sufficiently quiet for you. They were scarcely 4 years old, and they made me extremely uneasy on your account. Nonsense, retorted the Baroness. You could not have entertained any alarm on the subject, because you are perfectly well aware that I have had for a month in my service the very best coachman in Paris. But perhaps you have disposed of the coachman as well as the horses? My dear love, pray do not say any more of them, and I promise you another pair exactly like them in appearance, only more quiet and steady. The Baroness shrugged her shoulders with an air of ineffable contempt, while her husband, affecting not to observe this unconjugal gesture, turned towards Monte Cristo and said, Upon my word, Count, I am quite sorry not to have met you sooner. You are setting up an establishment, of course? Why, yes, replied the Count. I should have liked to have made you the offer of these horses. I have almost given them away, as it is, but as I before said, I was anxious to get rid of them upon any terms. They were only fit for a young man. I am much obliged to you, or much obliged by your kind intentions toward me, said Monte Cristo. But this morning I purchased a very excellent pair of carriage horses, and I do not think they were dear. There they are. Come, Monsieur Debray, you are a connoisseur, I believe. Let me have your opinion upon them. As Debray walked towards the window, Danglars approached his wife. I could not tell you before others, said he in a low tone, the reason of my parting with the horses, but a most enormous price was offered me this morning from them. Some madman or fool, bent upon ruining himself as fast as he can, actually sent his steward to me to purchase them at any cost, and the fact is, I have gained 16,000 francs by the sale of them. Come, don't look so angry, and you shall have 4,000 francs of the money to do with as you like, and Eugenie shall have 2,000. There, what do you think now of the affair? Wasn't I right to part with the horses? Madame Danglars surveyed her husband with a look of withering contempt. Great heavens! Suddenly exclaimed Debray. What is it? Asked the Baroness. I cannot be mistaken. Those are your horses, the very animals we were speaking of, harnessed to the Count's carriage. My dappled greys? Demanded the Baroness, springing to the window. 'Tis indeed they, said she. Danglars looked absolutely stupefied. How very singular, cried Monte Cristo with well-feigned astonishment. I cannot believe it, murmured the banker. Madame Danglars whispered a few words in the ear of Debray, who approached Monte Cristo, saying, "The Baroness wishes to know what you paid her husband." "I scarcely know," replied the Count. "It was a little surprise prepared for me by my steward and cost me, well, somewhere about 30,000 francs. Debray conveyed the Count's reply to the Baroness. Poor Danglars looked so crestfallen and discomfited that Monte Cristo assumed a pitying air towards him. "See," said the Count, "how very ungrateful women are. Your kind attention, in providing for the safety of the Baroness by disposing of the horses, does not seem to have made the least impression on her. But so it is. A woman will often, from mere wilfulness, prefer that which is dangerous to that which is safe. Therefore, in my opinion, my dear Baron, the best and easiest way is to leave them to their fancies and allow them to act as they please. And then, if any mischief follows, why, at least they have no one to blame but themselves." Danglars made no reply. He was occupied in anticipations of the coming scene between himself and the Baroness, whose frowning brow, like that of Olympic Jove, predicted a storm. Debray, who perceived the gathering clouds and felt no desire to witness the explosion of Madame Danglars' rage, suddenly recollected an appointment which compelled him to take his leave, while Monte Cristo, unwilling by prolonging his stay to destroy the advantages he hoped to obtain, made a farewell bow and departed, leaving Danglars to endure the angry reproaches of his wife. "Excellent," murmured Monte Cristo to himself as he came away. "All has gone according to my wishes. The domestic peace of this family is henceforth in my hands. Now then, to play another masterstroke by which I shall gain the heart of both husband and wife. Delightful! Still," added he, "amid all this I have not yet been presented to Mademoiselle Eugénie Danglars, whose acquaintance I should have been glad to make. But," he went on with his peculiar smile, "I am here in Paris, and have plenty of time before me. By and by will do for that." With these reflections he entered his carriage and returned home. 2 hours afterwards, Madame Danglars received a most flattering epistle from the Count, in which he entreated her to receive back her favorite dappled greys, protesting that he could not endure the idea of making his entry into the Parisian world of fashion with the knowledge that his splendid equipage had been obtained at the price of a lovely woman's regrets. The horses were sent back wearing the same harness she had seen on them in the morning. Only, by the Count's orders, in the center of each rosette that adorned either side of their heads had been fastened a large diamond. To Danglars, Monte Cristo also wrote, requesting him to excuse the whimsical gift of a capricious millionaire, and to beg the Baroness to pardon the Eastern fashion adopted in the return of the horses. During the evening, Monte Cristo quitted Paris for Auteuil, accompanied by Ali. The following day, about 3 o'clock, a single blow struck on the gong that summoned Ali to the presence of the Count. "Ali," observed his master, as the Nubian entered the chamber, "you have frequently explained to me how more than commonly skillful you are in throwing the lasso, have you not?" Ali drew himself up proudly, and then returned a sign in the affirmative. "I thought I did not mistake. With your lasso, you could stop an ox?" Again Ali repeated his affirmative gesture. "Or a tiger?" Ali bowed his head in token of assent. "A lion, even." Ali sprung forwards, imitating the action of one throwing the lasso, then of the strangled lion. "I understand," said Monte Cristo. "You wish to tell me you have hunted the lion?" Ali smiled with triumphant pride as he signified that he had indeed both chased and captured many lions. "But do you believe you could arrest the progress of 2 horses rushing forwards with ungovernable fury?" The Nubian smiled. "It is well," said Monte Cristo. "Then listen to me. Ere long, a carriage will dash past here, drawn by the pair of dappled gray horses you saw me with yesterday. Now, at the risk of your own life, you must manage to stop those horses before my door." Ali descended to the street and marked a straight line on the pavement immediately at the entrance of the house, and then pointed out the line he had drawn to the Count, who was watching him. The Count patted him gently on the shoulder, his usual mode of praising Ali, who, pleased and gratified with the commission assigned him, walked calmly towards a projecting stone forming the angle of the street and house, and seated himself thereon, began to smoke his chibouque, while Monte Cristo re-entered his dwelling, perfectly assured of the success of his plan. Still, as 5 o'clock approached and the carriage was momentarily expected by the Count, the indication of more than common impatience and uneasiness might be observed in his manner. He stationed himself in a room commanding a view of the street, pacing the chamber with restless steps, stopping merely to listen from time to time for the sound of approaching wheels, then to cast an anxious glance on Ali. But the regularity with which the Nubian puffed forth the smoke of his chibouque proved that he at least was wholly absorbed in the enjoyment of his favorite occupation. Suddenly, a distant sound of rapidly advancing wheels was heard, and almost immediately a carriage appeared, drawn by a pair of wild, ungovernable horses, while the terrified coachman strove in vain to restrain their furious speed. In the vehicle was a young woman and a child of about 7 or 8, clasped in each other's arms. Terror seemed to have deprived them even of the power of uttering a cry. The carriage creaked and rattled as it flew over the rough stones, and the slightest obstacle under the wheels would have caused disaster. But it kept on in the middle of the road, and those who saw it pass uttered cries of terror. Ali suddenly cast aside his chibouque, drew the lasso from his pocket, threw it so skillfully as to catch the forelegs of the near horse in its triple fold, and suffered himself to be dragged on for a few steps by the violence of the shock. Then the animal fell over on the pole, which snapped, and therefore prevented the other horse from pursuing its way. Gladly availing himself of this opportunity, the coachman leapt from his box, but Ali had promptly seized the nostrils of the second horse and held them in his iron grasp, till the beast, snorting with pain, sunk beside his companion. All this was achieved in much less time than is occupied in the recital. The brief space had, however, been sufficient for a man, followed by a number of servants, to rush from the house before which the accident had occurred, and as the coachman opened the door of the carriage, to take from it a lady who was convulsively grasping the cushions with one hand, while with the other she pressed to her bosom the young boy who had lost consciousness. Monte Cristo carried them both to the salon and deposited them on a sofa. "Compose yourself, madame," said he. "All danger is over." The woman looked up at these words, and with a glance far more expressive than any entreaties could have been, pointed to her child, who still continued insensible. "I understand the nature of your alarms, madame," said the Count, carefully examining the child, "but I assure you there is not the slightest occasion for uneasiness. Your little charge has not received the least injury. His insensibility is merely the effects of terror, and will soon pass." "Are you quite sure you do not say so to tranquilize my fears? See how deadly pale he is! My child, my darling Edward, speak to your mother. Open your dear eyes and look on me once again. Oh, sir, in pity send for a physician. My whole fortune shall not be thought too much for the recovery of my boy." With a calm smile and a gentle wave of the hand, Monte Cristo signed to the distracted mother to lay aside her apprehensions. Then, opening a casket that stood near, he drew forth a phial of Bohemian glass, encrusted with gold, containing a liquid of the color of blood, and of which he let fall a single drop on the child's lips. Scarcely had it reached them ere the boy, though still pale as marble, opened his eyes and eagerly gazed around him. At this the delight of the mother was almost frantic. "Where am I?" exclaimed she, "and to whom am I indebted for so happy a termination to my late dreadful alarm?" "Madame," answered the Count, "you are under the roof of one who esteems himself most fortunate in having been able to save you from a further continuance of your sufferings." "My wretched curiosity has brought all this about," pursued the lady. "All Paris rung with the praises of Madame Danglars' beautiful horses, and I had the folly to desire to know whether they really merited the high praise given to them." "Is it possible," exclaimed the Count with well-feigned astonishment, "that these horses belong to the Baroness?" "They do indeed. May I inquire if you are acquainted with Madame Danglars?" "I have that honor, and my happiness at your escape from the danger that threatened you is redoubled by the consciousness that I have been the unwilling and the unintentional cause of all the peril you have incurred. I yesterday purchased these horses of the Baron, but as the Baroness evidently regretted parting with them, I ventured to send them back to her with the request that she would gratify me by accepting them from my hands. You are then, doubtless, the Count of Monte Cristo, of whom Hermine has talked to me so much? You have rightly guessed, madame, replied the Count, and I am Madame Eloise de Villefort. The Count bowed with the air of a person who hears a name for the first time. How grateful will Monsieur de Villefort be for all your goodness! How thankfully will he acknowledge that to you alone he owes the existence of his wife and child! Most certainly, but for the prompt assistance of your intrepid servant, this dear child and myself must both have perished. Indeed, I still shudder at the fearful danger you were placed in. I trust you will allow me to recompense worthily the devotion of your man. I beseech you, madame, replied Monte Cristo, not to spoil Ali, either by too great praise or rewards. I cannot allow him to acquire the habit of expecting to be recompensed for every trifling service he may render. Ali is my slave, and in saving your life, he was but discharging his duty to me. Nay, interposed Madame de Villefort, on whom the authoritative style adopted by the Count made a deep impression. Nay, but consider that to preserve my life he has risked his own. His life, madame, belongs not to him. It is mine, in return for my having myself saved him from death. Madame de Villefort made no further reply. Her mind was utterly absorbed in the contemplation of the person who, from the first instant she saw him, had made so powerful an impression upon her. During the evident preoccupation of Madame de Villefort, Monte Cristo scrutinized the features and appearance of the boy she kept folded in her arms, lavishing on him the most tender endearments. The child was small for his age and unnaturally pale. A mass of straight black hair, defying all attempts to train or curl it, fell over his projecting forehead and hung down to his shoulders, giving increased vivacity to eyes already sparkling with a youthful love of mischief and fondness for every forbidden enjoyment. His mouth was large, and the lips, which had not yet regained their color, were particularly thin. In fact, the deep and crafty look, giving a predominant expression to the child's face, belonged rather to a boy of 12 or 14 than to one so young. His first movement was to free himself by a violent push from the encircling arms of his mother, and to rush forward to the casket from whence the Count had taken the phial of elixir. Then, without asking permission of anyone, he proceeded, in all the wilfulness of a spoiled child unaccustomed to restrain either whims or caprices, to pull the corks out of all the bottles. "Touch nothing, my little friend," cried the Count eagerly. "Some of those liquids are not only dangerous to taste, but even to inhale." Madame de Villefort became very pale, and seizing her son's arm, drew him anxiously toward her. But, once satisfied of his safety, she also cast a brief but expressive glance on the casket, which was not lost upon the Count. At this moment Ali entered. At sight of him, Madame de Villefort uttered an expression of pleasure, and, holding the child still closer towards her, she said, "Edward, dearest, do you see that good man? He has shown very great courage and resolution, for he exposed his own life to stop the horses that were running away with us, and would certainly have dashed the carriage to pieces. Thank him then, my child, in your very best manner, for had he not come to our aid, neither you nor I would have been alive to speak our thanks." The child stuck out his lips and turned away his head in a disdainful manner, saying, "He's too ugly." The Count smiled as if the child bade fair to realize his hopes, while Madame de Villefort reprimanded her son with a gentleness and moderation very far from conveying the least idea of a fault having been committed. "This lady," said the Count, speaking to Ali in the Arabic language, "is desirous that her son should thank you for saving both their lives, but the boy refuses, saying you are too ugly." Ali turned his intelligent countenance towards the boy, on whom he gazed without any apparent emotion. But the spasmodic working of the nostrils showed to the practiced eye of Monte Cristo that the Arab had been wounded to the heart. "Will you permit me to inquire," said Madame de Villefort as she rose to take her leave, "whether you usually reside here?" "No, I do not," replied Monte Cristo. It is a small place I have purchased quite lately. My place of abode is number 30, Avenue des Champs-Élysées, but I see you have quite recovered from your fright and are, no doubt, desirous of returning home. Anticipating your wishes, I have desired the same horses you came with to be put to one of my carriages, and Ali, he whom you think so very ugly, continued he, addressing the boy with a smiling air, will have the honor of driving you home, while your coachman remains here to attend to the necessary repairs of your calash. As soon as that important business is concluded, I will have a pair of my own horses harnessed to convey it direct to Madame Danglars. I dare not return with those dreadful horses, said Madame de Villefort. You will see, replied Monte Cristo, that they will be as different as possible in the hands of Ali. With him, they will be gentle and docile as lambs. Ali had, indeed, given proof of this, for, approaching the animals, who had been got upon their legs with considerable difficulty, he rubbed their foreheads and nostrils with a sponge soaked in aromatic vinegar, and wiped off the sweat and foam that covered their mouths. Then, commencing a loud whistling noise, he rubbed them well all over their bodies for several minutes. Then, undisturbed by the noisy crowd collected round the broken carriage, Ali quietly harnessed the pacified animals to the Count's chariot, took the reins in his hands, and mounted the box. When, to the utter astonishment of those who had witnessed the ungovernable spirit and maddened speed of the same horses, he was actually compelled to apply his whip in no very gentle manner before he could induce them to start, and even then all that could be obtained from the celebrated dappled greys, now changed into a couple of dull, sluggish, stupid brutes, was a slow, pottering pace, kept up with so much difficulty that Madame de Villefort was more than 2 hours returning to her residence in the Faubourg Saint-Honoré. Scarcely had the first congratulations upon her marvelous escape been gone through when she wrote the following letter to Madame Danglars. Dear Hermine, I have just had a wonderful escape from the most imminent danger, and I owe my safety to the very Count of Monte Cristo we were talking about yesterday, but whom I little expected to see today. I remember how unmercifully I laughed at what I considered your eulogistic and exaggerated praises of him, but I have now ample cause to admit that your enthusiastic description of this wonderful man fell far short of his merits. Your horses got as far as Ranelagh, when they darted forward like mad things, and galloped away at so fearful a rate that there seemed no other prospect for myself and my poor Edward but that of being dashed to pieces against their first object that impeded their progress. When a strange-looking man, an Arab, a Negro, or a Nubian, at least a black of some nation or other, at a signal from the Count, whose domestic he is, suddenly seized and stopped the infuriated animals, even at the risk of being trampled to death himself, and certainly he must have had a most wonderful escape. The Count then hastened to us and took us into his house, where he speedily recalled my poor Edward to life. He sent us home in his own carriage. Yours will be returned to you tomorrow. You will find your horses in bad condition from the results of this accident. They seem thoroughly stupefied, as if sulky and vexed at having been conquered by man. The Count, however, has commissioned me to assure you that 2 or 3 days' rest, with plenty of barley for their sole food during that time, will bring them back as to fine, that is, as terrifying a condition as they were in yesterday. Adieu. I cannot return you many thanks for the drive of yesterday, but after all, I ought not to blame you for the misconduct of your horses, more especially as it procured me the pleasure of an introduction to the Count of Monte Cristo, and certainly that illustrious personage, far apart from the millions he is said to be so very anxious to dispose of, seemed to me one of those curiously interesting problems I, for one, delight in solving at any risk, even if it were to necessitate another drive to the Bois behind your horses. Edward endured the accident with miraculous courage. He did not utter a single cry, but fell lifeless into my arms, nor did a tear fall from his eyes after it was over. I doubt not you will consider these praises the result of blind maternal affection, but there is a soul of iron in that delicate, fragile body. Valentine sends many affectionate remembrances to your dear Eugenie. I embrace you with all my heart. Eloise de Villefort. P.S. Do pray contrive some means for me to meet the Count of Monte Cristo at your house. I must and will see him again. I have just made Monsieur de Villefort promise to call on him, and I hope the visit will be returned." That night the adventure at Auteuil was talked of everywhere. Albert related it to his mother. Chateau Renaud recounted it at the Jockey Club, and Debray detailed it at length in the salons of the minister. Even Beauchamp accorded 20 lines in his journal to the relation of the Count's courage and gallantry, thereby celebrating him as the greatest hero of the day in the eyes of all the feminine members of the aristocracy. Vast was the crowd of visitors and inquiring friends who left their names at the residence of Madame de Villefort, with the design of renewing their visit at the right moment, of hearing from her lips all the interesting circumstances of this most romantic adventure. As for Monsieur de Villefort, he fulfilled the predictions of Eloise to the letter, donned his dress suit, drew on a pair of white gloves, ordered the servants to attend the carriage dressed in their full livery, and drove that same night to number 30 in the Avenue des Champs-Élysées. So we'll find out what happens tomorrow when Edmond Dantes, as the Count of Monte Cristo, reunites with Monsieur de Villefort. Exciting. All right, thank you very much for joining me today for 2 more chapters of the Count of Monte Cristo. I look forward to seeing you tomorrow, and have a great rest of your day. Bye.